Welcome back to my YouTube channel, everybody. Today, my guest is Mr. Ritesh Kotak, who's a cybersecurity analyst and expert. And today, with Ritesh, we'll talk about the TikTok ban and what's going on with TikTok these days in the US, especially, and worldwide. Thanks for your time, Ritesh. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, you are quite a big expert because you also consulted with the police in Canada at different levels, town level, city level, federal level. So, would you like to tell us something about who you are, your background, and whatever you feel is relevant about yourself for this conversation?
Yeah, I've had a bit of an interesting journey. Actually, always thought I was going to be an accountant and joined the police department straight out of finishing my university studies, and spent about 6, 7 years with two police agencies looking at computer crime, cyber crime. This is when cybercrime was on the rise. It was becoming much more mainstream. We've always had cyber related incidents, but this is when it's really started to garner a lot of attention. So did that, decided it was time to do something different. So decided to pursue higher education, lived around the world, did my MBA, worked in big tech for 2 years before I decided, you know what, one of the areas that I found interesting was the intersection between law, society, tech, and technology. So I decided to go to law school. So I am a licensed lawyer as well, in the province of Ontario, in Canada. And my area of practice has always been around data protection, cybersecurity, tech related issues, AI, as well. And that's kind of where I've been focusing a lot of my time, is kind of bringing in the technical side, but also looking at it from a policy standpoint on what does all this mean, and where's the future when it comes to this type of technology.
So let's start with our discussion about TikTok. The big problem here is that TikTok is strictly connected to the Chinese government. And that's unusual because probably this is the only application we have on our phones that is connected to a government. Would you like to tell us, to explain how this whole thing started? Because the problem we have here is that this application is actually backed by a government who's not too democratic either.
So TikTok's parent company is ByteDance, and ByteDance is headquartered in Beijing, China. And one of the concerns and one of the issues is when you have, especially in the US, there's 170 million users. A lot of them are minors. And the big issue became is around A, its dominance, B, all the data that it's collecting, but the Chinese connection of when you're a Chinese owned and operated company, there are laws in China related to national security, domestic security as well, where the Chinese government can compel an organization to turn over information at its request. And that's kind of one of the laws and rules of doing business in China. Other countries have very similar rules and laws as well. And that's where kind of the concern lies here, is that is it possible for the Chinese government to demand all this information about American citizens be turned over? Now you have this Rolodex of information. And it's just important to understand, like, what is that, what is that information? I know we're going to get into this in detail a little bit later on, but everything from who your friends are, what type of content you interact with, and the ability to essentially create these profiles on individuals. So with the lack of judicial oversight, like if you want that information in Canada, for example, from a tech company, there's rules you got to follow. You got to go to a judge and you have to say, Your Honor, I like this type of information. You got to do what's called a production order. These are what we call judicial authorization to get the information. There's ways of appealing that information if you're a tech company. And you say, well, wait a second, I don't want to turn over this information, but you don't have the same sort of rules and process in other countries, including China. And that's kind of where the issues begin, and why we're seeing this response from the US, but also other governments as well, including Canada.
Well, so tell me if this is a good comparison or not, because for instance, a few years ago, we saw that Apple refuse to unlock the iPhone belonging to a terrorist, even if the FBI was asking for it. And if I remember well, the final solution was that the FBI had to unblock that iPhone by themselves. Something of the sort cannot happen in China because the government can compel you.
Yeah, so that's a completely different
Okay.
situation. So what happened there was an individual that was a person of interest by the US government. It was I believe it was the FBI, and it was one thing to go to an organization like Apple and say, look, we want this information off this iPhone. Instead, I believe the request was a little bit more broad than that, asking Apple to essentially jailbreak their device, and then provide those key, provide that technology, that software, the back door, so they can get the type of information they need for that instance and instances moving forward. And that is where the issue lied. And that is, well, wait a second, U.S. government, we're not going to undermine our own system, our own software, our own security. And the end result is they're able to get the information by essentially hacking in or breaching some of the security protocols that the device had. And I believe the statement they put out is we no longer require the information from Apple. So it's a little bit of a different situation, but in principle, yeah, it's kind of we want this data, big tech or company, and if you want to operate within our geography, you're going to have to comply with our requests. And failure to comply would mean you're getting kicked out. And in the US, there's a process, but in countries like China, it's either you got to play by the rules or you're going to be financially punished.
Well, but what is the problem actually with what TikTok does on our phones? Because what I don't get here is it a problem of espionage, meaning that this application gathers more information than it's supposed to, or is it a matter of misinformation, like it conveys misinformation to try to hijack the public opinion for elections or anything of the sort?
Yeah, so it is. I would say there's multiple reasons for it. So first off, look, every social media platform is collecting this type of information. There's the way you open up your feed and the type of information you see. That is obviously of concern. We can talk about kind of the algorithms and the lack of algorithmic transparency on why you see the type of information that you see. But when you go through the privacy policies of TikTok and also other social media applications, there's a lot of information there. There's location-based information. There's what you're doing within the browser. There is who you're communicating with, the type of device that you're using. And think of it as a puzzle. And when you have all these pieces, you might have one piece here, another piece there, another piece there. But when you start taking all these pieces and putting it together, you might not have all the pieces about the individual or of this puzzle, but you know what the picture is. And when you have that type of data, especially on minors, 170 million Americans, you have information around and you're able to ascertain what are their political beliefs. What are their beliefs when it comes to certain types of issues? What triggers them? This is all information that, if the algorithm is essentially weaponized, can cause some very serious issues within a particular demographic or geography. And that's where, especially with elections, swaying public opinion, should all that information, all that power, all that it's kind of like that Spider-Man saying, right? With great power comes great responsibility. But what if there's great power and there's no responsibility? That is when it becomes problematic, and that is where the issues originally stem from.
But how about TikTok trying to steal my passwords from my phone of other applications? Is that the
Yeah,
case also?
I don't buy that. I think that look, if you're trying to log in to an application and you're using an in-app browser, Is it logging your keystrokes? Is it logging everything that you're doing? Is that information being retained? How long is it being retained for? Is it being erased? Who else has access to it? Those are all legitimate questions. But there's no evidence to suggest, from a technical standpoint, that there was something deliberate or passwords were taken. In fact, a lot of when you log into a website or you log into an app, user credentials are usually hashed. So what that means is they're you have a string of characters ABCD123. By the way, that's a horrible password. Should not be allowed. But let's just assume ABCD123. In the back end, it's actually a string of characters that cannot be reverse engineered to know that it was ABCD123, and that's what we call a hash value. So that's kind of how credentials are stored. Was TikTok stealing people's passwords and stuff like that? There's no evidence. There's no evidence to suggest that.
And also, let me add, since I'm also an IT guy, that stealing passwords sounds like the 90s, because today you need more than a password to access someone's profile on Instagram or anything else. Because the first time you do it, it sends you a message. You have multi-factor authentication. Therefore, it sends you a message and you have to insert the code, or it sends you an email and you have to click on the link. So just stealing passwords sounds old-fashioned. It doesn't work like that anymore.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, right? I think the MFA, the multi-factor authentication, we're kind of also moving to a password-less world as well. I always joke around with people. I say the most, when you're trying to remember all these passwords, because you never want to recycle them because of credential stuffing attacks and stuff like that. But probably the most pressed link on any of these sites is forgot password, right?
Oh,
And
yeah.
it's the like who's going to remember realistically all these passwords? So it's not the most effective and efficient way of dealing with it. That's why we're seeing these tokens or these keys for authentication as well. So you have passkeys, some actual hardware. You got authenticator apps. You got biometrics being used as well to authenticate into a network. It's just I think it's gonna get more and more sophisticated. It's gonna get that much harder. But yeah, just simply using a username and password and stealing those passwords, I think it does happen. It clearly does happen. We hear about these types of attacks all the time, but usually not on in these particular situations.
Well, you mentioned a point that I would like you to elaborate on. That is, also other softwares know a lot of things about me. For instance, Facebook knows all the people that I know, knows who my family are. And also, if I think of Google or my bank or Amazon, they have a whole lot of information about me. And for instance, Instagram also knows when I go on vacation and where. So what's the big difference here between, for instance, Meta and TikTok, or Google and TikTok, as far as the information that I give them and what they do with them?
So I always tell people, if you're not paying for the product, you are the product, right? So when you use these apps, it's not like you're paying for it. And it's like, wow, great, I'm connected to all these people. I can make free phone calls, video calls. Well, if you're not paying for it, then the commodity is your data. That's what gets monetized. That's how you get pushed certain types of advertisements and all these sponsored messages, like to the infrastructure to run these applications is expensive. It costs a lot of money. So at some point, the rubber has to meet the road, and that's kind of the business model at a very high level around it. And you make an interesting point. Like, look, all these organizations are collecting data. Well, what makes it different? At the end of the day, it's geography. It is the process of obtaining information. When you have a US based company, there are certain laws in place. The Communications Decency Act being one of them. If you want information, you got to go through a U.S. court. You have to do what's called a production order or a subpoena, or if it's international, you got to go through what's called the MLAT Treaty, the Mutual Legal Assistance Treaty, to obtain information. There's rules and there's processes compared to a company headquartered in China, which, look, there's still a process, but the fact that the government can essentially circumvent that process is what makes it problematic. And that's the net difference. At the end of the day, the headquarter where the parent company is headquartered. Aside from that, the type of data that's being collected, the type of way the data is being monetized, it's pretty much identical.
Well, and how is ByteDance reacting to this? Because last week we saw that for one day or half a day, TikTok was not working in the United States, not because it has been banned, but because the company itself stopped it, if I got it right. And then since President Trump says that he wants to give them more time, TikTok restarted working. And also the interesting thing that a lot of people are mistaking here is that President Trump is not saying he wants to stop the ban, but that he wants to give TikTok 90 more days to compel. So what's going on these days?
Yeah, I believe that number was actually changed to 75 days, but
Okay.
90 days, 75 days, at the end of the day, 2 to 3 months, right? To get to go in compliance. So actually it was technically banned. The law was passed by the Biden administration. It was upheld by the Supreme Court. There was a majority there. I believe it was 9-0 was the ruling. So the law went into effect. And TikTok said, "Look, we know that President Trump wants to work with us, but until we get reassurances, direct reassurances, we're going to have to go dark to comply with the law." And that's what they did. In fact, a few hours before they were supposed to actually go dark, and I believe the law was going to kick into effect. They ended up arbitrarily just making the app go dark for 170 million Americans. Now, when I believe he put a statement out on Truth Social, that's his social media platform, saying, he's going to work with them. That is when that was the reassurances they need. So they came back on, and they're kind of in this period right now to come up with some sort of solution that the U.S. government, mainly the Trump administration, is okay with. And what is that? Is it divestment? Is it the fact that ByteDance has to sell TikTok? Is it the fact that maybe a separate app gets created for the US or for the West? And there is precedent here, right? Like this might seem, oh, why on earth would we ever do this, or why does this make sense? A lot of people might be unaware that TikTok, the app itself, is not even available in China. They have their own version. I believe it's called Douyin. And that app is what people in China use to as TikTok. So the fact that you can have apps within certain geographies um, is not that far off. There is a precedent, and that's kind of my prediction on what I think is going to happen. I don't think ByteDance is willing to give up their secret sauce of being the algorithm, which is what has made TikTok what it essentially is, why it's so addictive, why millions of people in the US use it. It's because of the algorithm. Well, if you were to sell TikTok, that means the algorithm would come with it. I think that is where the issue here lies. So I can actually foresee a proposal where TikTok USA or TikTok West gets created. It's a similar but different algorithm, and it's under majority US ownership, and that kind of meets all the criteria. And as a user in the United States, it's probably going to be no different. You probably won't need to download a new app. You'll continue to use it. You'll comply with the laws. That's my prediction. But at the end of the day, it's only a prediction. Who knows what can happen in the next 2 to 3 months?
Well, but the impression we have from here is that the US are overreacting because you mentioned that the American government is discussing this ban and also Canada is following. But here it seems like nobody cares. Moreover, I think that people are mistaking this for like retaliation on China, or well, a very famous Italian politician also said that what uh, what the West is discussing is banning TikTok videos. How smart of him, how smart of his. And so, do you think that the U.S. is overreacting? The rest of the world is naive. How come no one out of North America seemed to care?
So I think that there's a bigger issue at play than, banning videos and TikTok, and that comes to the digital sovereignty of a country. And US, wants to obviously protect US tech companies. So does China. They want to protect tech companies and their citizens as well. And I think what the my biggest issue with the whole singling out a particular platform is the underlying issue around regulating technology in general, and nobody has seemed to have gotten it right. What I tell people is that we have 21st century problems, but we're using 20th century frameworks to try and solve those problems. And if we go ahead as society and ban a particular app or create a separate set of rules for a particular app, it won't actually address the issues. In fact, there was when TikTok was allegedly about to go dark, there were a lot of people in the US actually switching to competitor apps, and some of them actually owned right out of China. Red Note being one of them that all of a sudden just went up in popularity. So what is it like? What's next? Like, are we going to go and ban Red App? Are we going to go and ban other apps? Or do we need more of a global framework around what is acceptable and what is not in this global age of technology, answering questions around data security, data privacy, data sovereignty? Where's that data housed? Who has access to it? Can I request deletion? What happens when I delete my account? Who owns the IP and the digital artifacts and assets that are linked and tied to my account? I think these are all questions that need to be answered instead of singling out a particular platform. Because today it's TikTok, tomorrow it's going to be something else. So, this is the US reaction. There's obviously different global reactions in Canada. We haven't gone through with a ban, but the Canadian government did ask or demand TikTok to seize all Canadian operations. In other words, shut down their offices. And I believe there were two offices, one in Toronto, but one in Vancouver, that had to be shut down. Now, these are Canadian jobs. These are good paying jobs. We have upcoming elections in Canada. We also, a lot of advertisers depend on TikTok, a lot of small businesses coast to coast to coast. So it's clearly not the best approach. It's not the right answer to deal with a bigger issue here, and that is around protecting citizen information and making sure that these platforms and tools don't get weaponized against the population.
Do you think that this kind of bans actually work or not? Because to find a workaround solution is actually very easy. You just need a VPN to spoof your location, and they're very cheap. They're totally legal. And to be honest, I even have one to watch the American TV. So, I mean, if I'm American and TikTok gets banned and I want to use it, there are easy and cheap ways around it. So, you think that this will actually work?
No. Yeah, that's my short answer. Unless there's a global ban or something like that, people will be able to, and we see this all the time, right? They're able to physically be in one location and digitally somewhere else, right? And VPNs, virtual private networks, a lot of systems, lot of providers out there that can, provide that service. Some countries have even looked at banning the use of it and taking a enforcement model for people that are caught using this type of technology to circumvent certain protections, laws, and restrictions on certain type of content or platform. But in the 11th hour, like, none of that stuff really matters when you have the ability to circumvent these measures by simply downloading a VPN, paying a few dollars a month. Some are even free, and accessing it. So it doesn't address the root cause of the problem of what we've been discussing, and that is protecting citizens' data and making sure the tools don't get weaponized.
Well, you already said that probably it's very difficult to foresee what's going to happen in the next months, but let me ask you something that is even more challenging. What do you think that will happen by the deadline given by President Trump? Of course, ByteDance is not complying, so we'll get to a ban and then something happen something else happens after a while, and during this while TikTok will be unavailable? Is that what we're gonna face?
My gut says no. And
Okay.
again, this is speculation, right? And I'm sure that in whenever when that time comes, and people are going to look back at this podcast and say Ritesh got it right or he got it wrong, and they'll comment on it and go back and forth. I don't know. My gut really does say no. There's 170 million people. A lot of businesses rely on it. It's Trump himself has is said that he's looking for a deal. Um, there is some precedent here with the Chinese app example to create something that without transferring the secret sauce, which I think is the biggest issue here. So I think a solution will probably be will probably come up and that satisfies the parties. But your guess is as good as mine.
Okay. No, the only thing that I would like to highlight before we close is that this is serious. It's not that politicians want to ban TikTok because they want to retaliate on China or because they want to show off how bad they are and things of the sort. This is not political. This is security. I don't know if you agree with me.
Well, I think that there's two components to it, and I do believe security is one of them. I think the big issue is around the being able to manipulate public opinion, misinformation, disinformation is clearly in overdrive. Is getting more harder to decipher fact from fiction. We're looking at generative AI that's and tools that are coming out every single day. And no one's really gotten it right. So I think there's definitely a security component to this, but there's also another component, and that is the U.S. themselves produce these types of apps, and wanting to protect U.S. interests and U.S. jobs and these U.S. platforms, I think is another component to it. So look, I don't think there's one particular reason. I think this is a very complicated issue. And in due time, we'll see what happens. But yeah, I think this goes security is one component, but it definitely goes well beyond security as well.
Well, Ritesh, many thanks for your time and for your very precious explanations. I think that this was a very critical argument to cover these days, and I think that your expertise and your knowledge gave my viewers a pretty wide and complete overview of this subject.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks everybody else for watching this, and see you all in my next episode. Bye bye.